What if I told you that beneath the roar of every motorcycle engine lies a story that could change your life forever? What if the greatest lessons about courage, brotherhood, and pushing beyond your limits weren't found in boardrooms or classrooms, but on two wheels cutting through mountain passes at dawn? If you're ready to discover why millions of riders worldwide consider motorcycling more than just transportation, but a way of life that transforms ordinary people into legends, then hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about what it means to truly live. This is the story of Marcus Rodriguez, a man who started with nothing but a broken-down Honda in his garage and ended up redefining what's possible when steel meets determination on the open road. But this isn't just about one rider's journey. This is about the unbreakable bond between human and machine, the brotherhood that spans continents, and the moment when fear transforms into pure, unstoppable power. Picture this: a rain-soaked highway in Montana, visibility near zero, semi-trucks creating walls of spray that turn the road into a liquid nightmare. Most people would pull over and wait it out. But Marcus wasn't most people. With his Kawasaki Ninja screaming beneath him at 90 miles per hour, he was threading between 18-wheelers like a ghost, each move calculated to the millisecond, because stopping meant losing everything he'd worked for. The package strapped to his back contained the only thing that could save his younger sister's life, and the hospital was still 300 miles away. You see, Marcus hadn't started out as a legendary rider. 6 months earlier, he was just another mechanic in Detroit, working double shifts at a shop that barely paid enough to cover rent on his studio apartment. His sister Maria had been diagnosed with a rare condition that required experimental treatment only available in specialized facilities, treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. The family was drowning in medical bills, and traditional jobs weren't cutting it. That's when Marcus discovered the world of high-stakes motorcycle courier services. These weren't your typical delivery jobs. We're talking about transporting time-sensitive medical supplies, legal documents that could make or break multinational deals, and sometimes items so classified that asking questions would get you blacklisted from the industry. The pay was extraordinary, but the risks were beyond what most people could even imagine. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and you were either dead or broke, with no middle ground. Marcus's first assignment seemed simple enough. Deliver a sealed package from Chicago to Denver within 18 hours. The catch? It was December, and a massive blizzard was moving across the Great Plains. Weather services were advising all non-essential travel to cease immediately. But when you're earning more in one run than most people make in 3 months, you don't call in sick because of snow. He started that journey on a modified Yamaha R1, a machine he'd spent months perfecting in his garage. Every component had been chosen for maximum performance under extreme conditions. The engine produced over 200 horsepower, but power meant nothing without the skill to harness it. Marcus had been riding since he was 16, starting on dirt bikes in empty lots around Detroit, gradually working his way up to sport bikes on the street. But nothing had prepared him for what lay ahead. The first 200 miles went smoothly, cruise control set at a steady 85 mph through clear Illinois highways. But as he crossed into Iowa, the temperature began dropping rapidly. What started as light flurries quickly became heavy snow, and then transformed into a full-scale whiteout. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet, and the highway became a sheet of ice disguised as asphalt. This is where most riders would turn back. Hell, this is where most car drivers were already turning back. The highway was becoming a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, semis jackknifed across multiple lanes, cars spun out into ditches. But Marcus knew that turning back meant failing his sister, and failure wasn't an option he could live with. He dropped his speed to 60, then 50, then 40 miles per hour, but he kept moving forward. Every instinct in his body was screaming to find shelter. But his mind was focused on Maria, lying in that hospital bed, counting on him to make this delivery that would fund her next round of treatment. The motorcycle became an extension of his will, responding to shifts in weight so subtle they were almost telepathic. Hour after hour, he navigated through the storm. His heated gear was keeping him warm, but the mental exhaustion was becoming overwhelming. Ice was forming on his visor faster than he could clear it, and his hands were starting to cramp from gripping the handlebars so tightly. But somewhere around the Nebraska border, something magical happened. The storm began to break just as the sun was setting, creating this incredible light show across the sky. The clouds were still heavy and threatening, but rays of golden sunlight were cutting through like spotlights on a stage. And in that moment, Marcus realized he wasn't just surviving this ride, he was mastering it. The motorcycle wasn't fighting against the conditions anymore, it was dancing with them. That's when he understood what the veteran couriers meant when they talked about finding your flow state. It's that moment when the bike becomes part of you, when reading the road conditions happens automatically, when your body reacts to danger before your conscious mind even recognizes it exists. You stop riding the motorcycle and start becoming one with it. The remaining miles to Denver passed in what felt like minutes. Marcus pulled into the delivery location with 47 minutes to spare, his Yamaha purring like it had just taken a leisurely Sunday cruise instead of battling through one of the worst storms of the decade. The client was waiting, clearly amazed that anyone had attempted the delivery in those conditions, let alone succeeded. But here's the thing about that first successful run. It changed Marcus in ways he couldn't have predicted. Standing there in that Denver parking lot, steam rising from his motorcycle's engine, he realized he'd discovered something about himself that regular life had never revealed. Under extreme pressure, when everything was on the line, he didn't just survive, he thrived. Word spread quickly through the courier network about the rookie who'd completed the impossible Denver run. Within days, Marcus was getting calls for increasingly challenging assignments. A legal document that needed to be in Los Angeles within 12 hours. Medical supplies for a hospital in Phoenix that was dealing with a crisis. Each job was another test, another opportunity to push beyond what seemed humanly possible. But the real transformation wasn't just in Marcus's riding skills, it was in his entire approach to life. Before motorcycles, he'd been the kind of person who played it safe, who avoided risks, who always chose the path of least resistance. The bike taught him that sometimes the most dangerous choice is not taking any risks at all. Sometimes you have to lean into the curve so hard that your knee touches the pavement, because that's the only way to make it through. 6 months into his courier career, Marcus had not only paid for Maria's treatment, but had also built up a reputation as one of the most reliable riders in the business. He'd upgraded to a fleet of specialized bikes, a BMW R1250 GS for long-distance touring in tough conditions, a Ducati Panigale for high-speed urban runs, and a custom-built Harley-Davidson for assignments that required a more low-profile approach. Each bike had been modified to his exact specifications, with upgraded suspension systems that could handle anything from mountain passes to city streets, advanced GPS navigation systems that worked even in areas with poor cell coverage, and communication equipment that allowed him to stay in contact with dispatch, regardless of weather conditions. But the most important modifications were the ones he'd made to himself. Through thousands of miles of riding in every conceivable condition, Marcus had developed reflexes that bordered on supernatural. He could read weather patterns by the way the wind felt against his helmet. He could predict how a car driver was going to behave just by watching their body language through their rear window. Most importantly, he'd learned to stay calm when everyone around him was panicking. That skill was put to the ultimate test during what became known in courier circles as the Phoenix Run. A pharmaceutical company had developed a breakthrough treatment for a rare childhood cancer, but their primary manufacturing facility had been destroyed in a fire. They had exactly one backup batch of the medication, stored in their Boston laboratory, and it needed to be in Phoenix within 36 hours to save a 7-year-old girl whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. The challenge wasn't just the distance, it was the timing. A massive storm system was moving across the country, creating dangerous conditions from Boston to Arizona. Commercial flights were being canceled, and ground shipping companies were refusing to guarantee delivery times. That's when Marcus got the call. The pay for this run was more than he'd made in his first 6 months as a courier combined. But it wasn't the money that made him accept. It was the thought of that little girl in Phoenix, fighting for her life, while adults argued about liability and insurance coverage. Sometimes being a motorcycle courier wasn't about the adrenaline or the challenge, it was about being someone's last hope when all other options had failed. Marcus chose his BMW for this run, knowing he'd need the stability and comfort for nearly 2,000 miles of continuous riding. He loaded up with extra fuel canisters, emergency food supplies, and enough weather gear to handle anything from desert heat to mountain snow. The medication was secured in a specially designed carrier that would maintain proper temperature, regardless of external conditions. The first leg from Boston to Buffalo was surprisingly smooth. Marcus made good time on Interstate 90, maintaining a steady pace while staying alert for changing weather conditions. But as he approached the Great Lakes region, the storm system began to intensify. What had been predicted as moderate rain turned into a severe thunderstorm with winds gusting over 60 miles per hour. Riding a motorcycle in those conditions requires a completely different mindset than normal weather riding. Every gust of wind tries to push you into a different lane. Every flash of lightning temporarily blinds you just long enough to miss important road hazards. The rain doesn't just make the road slippery, it creates a constant spray that makes it nearly impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. But Marcus had learned to use challenging conditions to his advantage. While other traffic slowed to a crawl or pulled over completely, he was able to maintain his pace by reading the road in ways that car drivers couldn't. The motorcycle's smaller profile meant he could find clear paths between vehicles, and his enhanced visibility from the higher seating position allowed him to spot problems before they became dangerous. As he crossed into Ohio, the storm began to shift from rain to sleet, and then to snow. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the road conditions were becoming increasingly treacherous. This was the point where most riders would seriously consider finding a hotel and waiting for better weather. But the little girl in Phoenix didn't have time to wait for better weather. Marcus had prepared for this moment during months of training rides in harsh conditions. He'd practiced emergency stops on icy roads, learned how to maintain control when the rear wheel starts to slide, and developed an intuitive understanding of how different road surfaces behave in various weather conditions. All of that training was about to be put to the ultimate test. The most dangerous part of the journey came through the mountains of Colorado. The elevation changes meant that weather conditions could shift dramatically within just a few miles. One minute he was riding through clear skies with perfect visibility. The next he was climbing through a cloud layer so thick it felt like riding inside a bottle of milk. At one point, while navigating a particularly treacherous mountain pass, Marcus encountered a situation that still gives him chills when he thinks about it. A section of the highway had been closed to regular traffic due to avalanche danger, but emergency vehicles were still being allowed through. Marcus managed to convince the highway patrol that his delivery qualified as a medical emergency, but they warned him that he'd be riding alone through an area where massive amounts of snow were barely being held in place by temperature and wind conditions. For 27 miles, Marcus rode through what could only be described as a frozen hell. The road was covered with packed snow and ice, Visibility was near zero due to blowing snow, and the constant threat of avalanche meant that stopping wasn't really an option. Any loud noise or vibration could potentially trigger a snowslide that would bury the highway under thousands of tons of snow and ice. The BMW performed flawlessly, its advanced traction control and stability systems keeping the bike upright even when the rear wheel lost contact with the road surface. But technology can only do so much. The rest was up to Marcus's skill and determination. Every mile was a meditation on balance, focus, and the absolute refusal to give up, even when giving up would have been the reasonable choice. When he finally emerged from the mountains into the clear desert air of Arizona, Marcus had been riding for over 28 hours straight. His body was exhausted, his mind was operating on pure willpower, but the medication was still secure and properly preserved. The hospital was less than 50 miles away, and he was going to make it on time. The delivery itself was almost anticlimactic. Marcus pulled up to the hospital loading dock, handed over the temperature-controlled case, and watched as medical personnel rushed it inside to begin preparing the treatment. A few days later, he received a message from the pharmaceutical company with a photo of a little girl smiling from her hospital bed. Her treatment successful, her future bright again. That message changed something fundamental in how Marcus viewed his role as a courier. It wasn't just about the thrill of high-speed riding or the satisfaction of completing challenging deliveries. It was about being part of a network of people who understood that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when someone is willing to take the risks that others won't. Word of the Phoenix Run spread throughout the motorcycle courier community like wildfire. Marcus found himself being contacted not just for individual deliveries, but to help establish new courier routes in challenging territories. Companies were asking him to train other riders, to develop safety protocols for extreme weather operations, and to serve as a consultant for high-stakes delivery operations. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from within the riding community itself. Veteran motorcyclists who had been on the road for decades began seeking Marcus out at motorcycle events and rallies, not to challenge his skills, but to learn from his experiences. He discovered that the courier work had taught him things about motorcycle control and risk management that even longtime riders had never encountered. This led to Marcus establishing what he called the Iron Route Academy, an intensive training program for riders who wanted to push their skills beyond what conventional motorcycle safety courses could provide. The program wasn't about teaching people to be reckless or to take unnecessary risks. It was about developing the advanced skills and mental discipline needed to remain safe when operating in challenging conditions. The academy attracted students from all over the world, military personnel who needed to understand motorcycle operations in combat zones, search and rescue workers who operated in remote areas, and civilian riders who simply wanted to become the best motorcyclists they could be. But it also attracted a different type of student, riders who had experienced life-changing moments on their motorcycles and wanted to understand how to channel that transformation into other areas of their lives. Marcus discovered that the lessons learned from extreme motorcycle courier work applied to far more than just riding. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to make split-second decisions with incomplete information, to push through physical and mental barriers, these skills were transforming his students' careers, relationships, and overall approach to life's challenges. One student, Sarah Chen, was a corporate attorney who had always played it safe in her career, never taking on cases that might damage her reputation or firm standing. After completing the Iron Route program, she began accepting pro bono cases for clients who couldn't afford representation, often taking on powerful corporations and government agencies. Her success rate was remarkable, but more importantly, she had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in her work that had been missing for years. Another student, David Murphy, was a father of 3 who had been struggling with anxiety and depression after losing his job during an economic downturn. The discipline and confidence he gained through advanced motorcycle training helped him start his own business, and within 2 years, he was employing 12 people and had rebuilt his family's financial security. But the real transformation was in his relationship with his children, who saw him as a source of strength and stability rather than worry and stress. These stories multiplied across the years as more riders discovered that motorcycles could be teachers as well as transportation. Marcus began to understand that his real calling wasn't just as a courier or instructor, but as someone who helped people discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The academy evolved into something much larger than a riding school. It became a community of people who understood that growth requires risk, that mastery demands dedication, and that sometimes the most important journeys happen not when you're traveling to a destination, but when you're becoming the person capable of making that journey. Marcus started organizing long-distance group rides that combined advanced riding instruction with personal development exercises. These weren't typical motorcycle tours where riders stayed in hotels and ate at restaurants every night. These were expeditions where participants learned to be completely self-sufficient, to navigate by map and compass when GPS failed, to perform mechanical repairs in remote locations with limited tools. One particular expedition, a 3-week ride from Alaska to Argentina, became legendary within the motorcycle community. 12 riders started the journey, each carrying everything they needed for 3 weeks of travel through some of the most challenging terrain in the Western Hemisphere. They crossed mountain passes at 14,000 feet elevation, navigated through dense jungle sections where the humidity made breathing difficult, and rode across desert stretches where the nearest gas station was over 200 miles away. But the most challenging part wasn't the geography or the weather conditions, it was the internal journey that each rider experienced. When you're completely responsible for your own survival, when every decision could mean the difference between success and disaster, when you can't rely on anyone else to solve your problems, you discover reserves of strength and resourcefulness that civilized life never demands. By the time the group reached Argentina, they weren't the same people who had left Alaska 3 weeks earlier. They had proven to themselves that they were capable of far more than they had ever imagined. They had faced their fears and discovered that fear was just information, not a stop sign. They had pushed their bodies and minds beyond previous limits and found that those limits had been largely imaginary. The expedition also demonstrated the power of the motorcycle community to support and challenge each other simultaneously. When one rider's bike broke down in the middle of the Atacama Desert, the entire group stopped to help diagnose and repair the problem. When another rider was struggling with altitude sickness in the Andes, others shared their medication and adjusted the route to allow for additional acclimatization time. But they also held each other accountable to the highest standards of preparation, safety, and personal responsibility. When someone made a poor decision that could have endangered the group, they addressed it directly and immediately. This combination of support and accountability created an environment where people could take significant risks, while minimizing unnecessary dangers. Marcus realized that this dynamic was what made the motorcycle community so special compared to other recreational activities. Riders understand that they are literally trusting each other with their lives, and that level of mutual dependence creates bonds that go far beyond casual friendships. It creates a brotherhood and sisterhood based on shared risk, shared adventure, and shared commitment to helping each other become better versions of themselves. This understanding led Marcus to establish what he called the Long Road Project, an ongoing series of expeditions designed to help riders discover not just new places, but new capabilities within themselves. Each expedition was carefully designed to present challenges that required participants to grow beyond their current comfort zones, while maintaining appropriate safety margins. The project attracted participants from all walks of life and all skill levels. Doctors, teachers, construction workers, retirees, students, veterans, single mothers, corporate executives, they all found common ground in their desire to use motorcycles as vehicles for personal transformation. The diversity of backgrounds actually enhanced the experience, as participants learned from each other's different approaches to problem-solving and risk management. One of the most impactful expeditions was a month-long ride through remote areas of Mongolia, where participants lived nomadically, staying with local families who had maintained traditional lifestyles for centuries. The experience taught riders about simplicity, about finding happiness and fulfillment with minimal material possessions, about the importance of community and mutual support in challenging environments. Another expedition followed historic trade routes through Central Asia, retracing paths that had been used by merchants and explorers for thousands of years. Participants gained perspective on their own challenges by experiencing the same landscapes and obstacles that previous generations had navigated with much more primitive technology and support systems. But perhaps the most transformative expeditions were the ones closer to home, where participants discovered that extraordinary adventures were possible without traveling to exotic locations. A 2-week ride through the backroads of Appalachia revealed hidden communities and stunning landscapes that most people never experienced despite living within a few hundred miles. A winter expedition through the northern Rocky Mountains taught advanced cold-weather survival skills while showcasing the incredible beauty of snow-covered mountain ranges. Each expedition reinforced the same fundamental lessons: that human beings are capable of adapting to and thriving in almost any environment, that most limitations are mental rather than physical, that the strongest source of motivation comes from having a purpose larger than yourself, and that the motorcycle is one of the most effective tools ever created for discovering these truths about yourself. As the Long Road Project grew in scope and impact, Marcus began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events outside the motorcycle community. Business leaders wanted to understand how extreme riding expeditions could develop leadership skills and team cohesion. Mental health professionals were interested in how challenging motorcycle experiences could help people overcome anxiety, depression, and trauma. Educational institutions wanted to incorporate expedition-based learning into their curricula. Marcus found himself becoming an inadvertent expert on using controlled risk-taking as a tool for personal development. His presentations weren't typical motivational speaking events, filled with platitudes and generic advice. They were detailed case studies of how specific challenges produce specific types of growth, supported by years of observing hundreds of participants push through their own limitations. The core message was always the same: comfort zones are not safe zones, they are stagnation zones. Real safety comes from developing the skills, knowledge, and mental resilience needed to handle challenging situations. The motorcycle becomes a teacher because it provides immediate feedback on your decisions. It rewards preparation and punishes carelessness. And it creates situations where you must act decisively even when you don't have complete information. This philosophy attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Military training programs began incorporating motorcycle-based exercises to develop decision-making skills under pressure. Corporate leadership development programs started using riding expeditions as team-building experiences. Therapeutic programs for veterans and trauma survivors began utilizing motorcycle mechanics and riding instruction as paths to rebuilding confidence and self-efficacy. But the most rewarding recognition came from individual riders who had used motorcycles to transform their lives in ways that went far beyond recreational enjoyment. Letters and messages poured in from people who had overcome addiction, rebuilt relationships, started new careers, moved to new locations, and generally redesigned their lives around principles they had learned from their motorcycles. One message that particularly moved Marcus came from a woman named Jennifer, who had been in an abusive marriage for over a decade. She had attended one of his weekend riding courses almost by accident. Her husband had given her the course as a birthday gift, probably expecting her to fail and come back home grateful for his protection and support. Instead, she discovered that she was capable of controlling a powerful machine through challenging conditions, that she could make split-second decisions that kept her safe, that she could navigate to unfamiliar destinations and handle mechanical problems independently. The confidence she gained from motorcycling gave her the strength to leave the abusive relationship and build a new life for herself and her children. 2 years later, Jennifer had become an advanced rider who was leading women-only motorcycle expeditions across the western United States. Her story inspired dozens of other women to use motorcycles as tools for reclaiming their independence and self-confidence. She eventually became one of the instructors at the Iron Route Academy, specializing in helping people who had been told they weren't capable of handling challenging situations. Stories like Jennifer's reinforced Marcus's belief that motorcycles are far more than recreational vehicles or transportation methods. They are tools for self-discovery, platforms for building genuine confidence, and catalysts for positive life change. The key is approaching them with the right mindset, understanding that the real value comes not from the machine itself, but from how the machine challenges you to become a better version of yourself. This understanding led Marcus to establish partnerships with organizations that served populations who could benefit from motorcycle-based development programs. He worked with veterans organizations to create riding programs that helped former military personnel transition to civilian life by channeling their need for challenge and adventure into positive pursuits. He partnered with youth development organizations to create programs that taught teenagers advanced life skills through motorcycle mechanics and riding instruction. One of the most successful partnerships was with a program that worked with formerly incarcerated individuals who were trying to rebuild their lives after release from prison. Many of these men and women had struggled with traditional rehabilitation programs because they didn't address the underlying issues that had led to criminal behavior. Lack of purpose, low self-esteem, poor decision-making skills, and inability to handle stress and pressure in healthy ways. The motorcycle program addressed all of these issues simultaneously. Participants learned valuable mechanical skills that could lead to employment opportunities. They developed confidence through mastering challenging riding techniques. They learned to make good decisions under pressure through advanced safety training. Most importantly, they became part of a community that valued personal growth, mutual support, and individual responsibility. The success rate was remarkable. Participants in the motorcycle program were 80% less likely to re-offend compared to those who went through traditional rehabilitation programs. But the real measure of success was the transformation in participants' self-perception and life direction. They stopped seeing themselves as failures or victims and started seeing themselves as people who had overcome significant challenges and were now helping others do the same. Marcus realized that these programs worked because motorcycles create what psychologists call mastery experiences, situations where people prove to themselves that they can handle difficult challenges through skill, preparation, and perseverance, rather than luck or external assistance. These experiences build what researchers call self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence events that affect your life through your own actions. This understanding led to the development of more sophisticated program curricula that systematically built participants' confidence through increasingly challenging riding exercises. The progression was carefully designed so that each new challenge was difficult enough to require genuine effort and growth, but not so difficult as to be overwhelming or dangerous. The programs also incorporated elements of traditional mentorship, pairing newer riders with experienced motorcyclists who could provide guidance, support, and accountability. These relationships often extended far beyond the formal program duration, creating ongoing support networks that helped participants maintain their positive momentum long after completing their training. As word spread about the effectiveness of these programs, Marcus began receiving requests from organizations around the world. He helped establish similar programs in Australia, focusing on Aboriginal youth development. He consulted on programs in Europe that served refugees and immigrants who were struggling to integrate into new cultures. He worked with organizations in South America that were using motorcycle training as part of rural economic development initiatives. Each program had to be adapted to local conditions, cultural values, and specific community needs. But the core principles remained consistent. Motorcycles provide unique opportunities for skill development, confidence building, and community formation that can serve as catalysts for broader life improvement. The international expansion also taught Marcus important lessons about the universal appeal of motorcycles as tools for personal development. Regardless of cultural background, economic status, or previous life experiences, people responded to the combination of challenge, freedom, and personal responsibility that motorcycle riding requires. The specific expression might vary from culture to culture, but the fundamental human need for growth, mastery, and connection remained constant. This universality led to some unexpected collaborations. Marcus found himself working with researchers who were studying the psychological and neurological effects of risk-taking activities. Brain imaging studies showed that people who regularly engaged in controlled risk-taking activities like advanced motorcycle riding showed increased activity in areas of the brain associated with decision-making, emotional regulation, and stress management. The research suggested that appropriate risk-taking might actually be necessary for optimal psychological development, challenging conventional wisdom that safety should always be the primary consideration. The studies indicated that people who never faced significant challenges often struggled with anxiety, depression, and general life satisfaction, while those who regularly engaged in challenging but manageable risk-taking activities reported higher levels of happiness, confidence, and overall life satisfaction. These findings had profound implications for how society thinks about safety, education, and personal development. They suggested that protecting people from all risks might actually be harmful to their long-term well-being, while teaching people to assess and manage risks appropriately could be one of the most valuable life skills possible. Marcus began incorporating these research findings into his training programs, helping participants understand not just how to ride motorcycles safely, but why challenging themselves through controlled risk-taking was important for their overall psychological health and life satisfaction. This approach attracted attention from mental health professionals who were looking for more effective ways to help clients overcome anxiety, build confidence, and develop resilience. The convergence of practical riding instruction, psychological research, and real-world application results led to the development of what Marcus called applied adventure therapy, a structured approach to using motorcycle-based experiences as tools for addressing various mental health and personal development challenges. The therapy wasn't about using motorcycles to escape from problems or avoid difficult emotions. It was about using the immediate feedback and genuine consequences of riding to develop more effective approaches to handling life's challenges. When you're riding a motorcycle through challenging conditions, you can't avoid reality. You can't blame others for your problems, and you can't succeed without developing genuine competence. This directness made motorcycle-based therapy particularly effective for people who had become stuck in patterns of negative thinking, learned helplessness, or avoidance behaviors. The motorcycle demanded engagement, competence, and personal responsibility in ways that were impossible to fake or avoid. The therapy programs attracted participants from all backgrounds who were dealing with various life challenges: business executives who had lost confidence after career setbacks, athletes recovering from injuries that had ended their competitive careers, students who were struggling with anxiety and depression, couples who wanted to rebuild trust and communication in their relationships. Each program was individually designed based on participants' specific needs and goals, but all incorporated the same core elements: progressive skill development, controlled challenge exposure, community support, and integration of riding experiences with broader life applications. The results consistently exceeded expectations. Participants reported not just improved riding skills, but increased confidence in their professional lives, better relationships with family and friends, improved physical health due to increased activity levels, and greater overall life satisfaction. Perhaps most importantly, participants learned that they were capable of much more than they had previously believed. They discovered that most of their limitations were self-imposed, that with proper preparation and mindset, they could handle challenges that had previously seemed impossible, and that taking appropriate risks was not just safe, but essential for continued growth and happiness. These discoveries led many participants to make significant positive changes in their lives. Some changed careers to pursue work that was more challenging and meaningful. Others ended relationships that were holding them back and formed new connections with people who shared their commitment to growth and adventure. Many began pursuing dreams and goals they had abandoned years earlier, armed with new confidence in their ability to overcome obstacles and persist through difficulties. The ripple effects extended far beyond the individual participants. Spouses reported that their partners had become more engaged, confident, and supportive. Children said their parents were more fun to be around and better at helping them face their own challenges. Employers noticed increased leadership skills, better decision-making under pressure, and improved team collaboration. Marcus realized that motorcycles had become vehicles for creating positive change that extended far beyond the riding community. They were tools for helping people become better versions of themselves, which in turn made them better family members, employees, leaders, and community members. This realization led to his most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive documentary series that would capture the stories of people whose lives had been transformed through their relationships with motorcycles. The series would go beyond typical motorcycle content focused on bikes, gear, and riding techniques to explore the deeper human stories of growth, courage, and transformation. The production took over 2 years and involved traveling to 6 continents to interview riders from every possible background and circumstance. Each episode focused on different aspects of how motorcycles can serve as catalysts for positive life change, overcoming fear, building confidence, developing leadership skills, creating community, finding purpose, and discovering capabilities you never knew you possessed. The series resonated with audiences far beyond the motorcycle community. Viewers who had never considered riding found themselves inspired by the stories of ordinary people who had used motorcycles to accomplish extraordinary things. The episodes generated discussions about risk-taking, personal growth, and the importance of challenging yourself that extended across social media platforms and generated thousands of hours of conversation. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from viewers who decided to start their own motorcycle journeys after watching the series. Motorcycle dealerships reported increased sales to people who specifically mentioned being inspired by the documentary. Riding schools experienced unprecedented demand for training courses. Most importantly, Marcus began receiving messages from people who had used motorcycles as starting points for broader life transformations. The success of the documentary series led to additional projects, books, podcasts, online training programs, and live events that continued to spread the message that motorcycles are tools for self-discovery and personal growth, rather than just recreational toys or transportation methods. Through all of these projects and programs, Marcus never lost sight of the original lesson that had started his journey. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is keep moving forward, even when the conditions are challenging, even when you're scared, even when you're not sure you have what it takes to succeed. Every time he threw his leg over a motorcycle and fired up the engine, he was reminded of that snowy night in Montana when he'd been racing to save his sister's life. That experience had taught him that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things when they have sufficient motivation, proper preparation, and the courage to take action despite uncertainty and risk. That lesson had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of thousands of people who had participated in his programs, watched his documentaries, read his books, or simply been inspired by his example to push beyond their own perceived limitations. The motorcycle had been the vehicle, but the real journey had always been internal. The transformation from someone who played it safe to someone who embraced appropriate challenges, from someone who accepted limitations to someone who constantly tested boundaries, from someone who rode alone to someone who helped others discover their own capacity for growth and adventure. Standing in his garage now, surrounded by the motorcycles that had carried him through countless adventures and challenges, Marcus understood that the greatest rides were still ahead. Not because there were new places to explore or new records to set, but because there were always new people ready to discover what they were truly capable of accomplishing when they stopped making excuses and started taking action. The roar of a motorcycle engine starting up wasn't just the sound of combustion and mechanical precision, it was the sound of possibility, of adventure, of transformation waiting to begin. And for anyone brave enough to grab the handlebars and twist the throttle, the greatest journey of their life was just one ride away. That's the real secret every motorcycle rider discovers eventually. The bike doesn't take you places. It reveals the places that were always inside you, waiting to be explored. The road doesn't give you adventures. It shows you that you were always capable of adventure. You just needed the right catalyst to unlock that potential. If this story has inspired you to think differently about what's possible in your own life, whether on two wheels or not, then make sure you've subscribed to this channel, because every week we're sharing more stories of ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things through courage, preparation, and the willingness to embrace challenges that others avoid. The next story could be yours, and the next adventure is always just one decision away from beginning.